If you've paid any attention to Star Trek over the last year, you will know that there has been a growing and growingly loud call for a Star Trek Legacy series to be greenlit in the aftermath of Star Trek Picard's third season. Now, the best thing that we can do is hope and wait and come up with storylines that absolutely need an answer. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferry for TrekCulture, and here are 10 story arcs Star Trek Legacy should continue. Number 10. Species 8472. Species 8472 have only been seen on screen in Star Trek Voyager at this point, though they have been an extensive storyline in Star Trek Online. There, they would be renamed the Undine, and a war would break out between them and the Federation. Apparently, the events of In the Flesh didn't have the positive outcome one might have hoped for. Translating this to Star Trek Legacy, with 7 of 9 commanding the Enterprise G, this seems like a perfect storyline to pick up, especially when one remembers that 7 and 8472 have a complicated history. It was the Borg who first invaded their space, with 7 herself directly responsible for beaming a lone survivor aboard a Hirogen vessel. With this history, exploring 7's relationship with them as she navigates her personal feelings while commanding the Federation flagship would make for a fascinating continuation of this largely untapped resource. If nothing else, seeing this tripedal species rendered in 4K would be a sight to behold. Number 9. New Kardashia. The close of the Dominion War came with the revolt of the Cardassian people, who switched sides and joined the Federation alliance. Damar's resistance managed to storm Dominion headquarters, though he himself was killed in the attack. The stories that have arisen in the years since vary in terms of who exactly is in charge, but for the purpose of this article, we would like to pick up on Garak taking control of the new Cardassian Union. Our selfish reasons for desiring Andrew Robinson to return to Trek aside, Garak's control of their government could actually serve as a controversial move. Garak may have sided with the Angels against the Dominion, though one must never assume that he is a good man. He's principled, but his drive to return home was fueled by his hatred of Dukat and the Dominion, as opposed to remodeling Cardassia to fit the Starfleet ideal of democracy. Star Trek Discovery has revealed that at some point in history, Kardassia does indeed join the Federation, yet there are almost 800 years to explore between those points. The Cardassian Union has been responsible for some dreadful atrocities in the galaxy, so how then would their renewal and return be perceived by such powers as the Bajorans and Klingons? Number 8. Klingon Expansion. From Star Trek's earliest days, the Klingons have been bound together in an empire. This is an often overlooked fact, particularly since peace treaties have been signed between them and Starfleet. The greatest period of cooperation occurred in Deep Space Nine when they joined the war against the Dominion. Yet, in the year before this, they began an assault on both Kardassia and Starfleet, engaging both in a brutal campaign of conquest. As Commander Worf noted, there had been many warriors in the Empire who claimed they had been at peace for too long. The destruction of the Romulan homeworld and destabilization of their empire would seem to offer a ripe opportunity for expansion again. After all, despite periods of peace between both powers, the Klingons and the Romulans were old foes. One could hardly be surprised if the Empire adapted that old saying, Romulus's difficulty is Kronos' opportunity. Is this something that Starfleet could stand by and do nothing about? Technically, they have no jurisdiction over the Beta Quadrant. However, even with Chancellor Martok at the head of the Empire, the idea of the Empire stands in opposition to the Federation's ideals. Disappointing as it may be for the history of Star Trek, this may prove to be one of the pivotal storylines in the history of the franchise. Number 7. The Gamma Quadrant. The introduction of the Bajoran wormhole in Deep Space Nine saw audiences transported across the galaxy to the Gamma Quadrant. While the first couple of seasons of the show saw some exploration, the rapid rise of the Dominion effectively put paid to much further discovery out there. However, with the treaty put in place in What You Leave Behind, and the rogue changelings being dealt with in Star Trek Picard, there is a huge opportunity for new stories and discoveries on the far side of the Celestial Temple. More on that later. While the Dominion arc is effectively wrapped up nicely, that leaves an entire quadrant to be explored. The developments of Star Trek Prodigy, particularly in the field of warp drive and propulsion, also offer a means to explore the Gamma Quadrant without having to rely on the wormhole. If one wanted to give Dominion space a wide berth, one could simply start with the border between the Alpha and Gamma Quadrants, working out from there. Number 6. Schisms. Arguably one of the most frightening episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, Schisms introduced this nightmare species of aliens from another dimension. The original episode created a drawn-out feeling of unease and dread, coupled with the very real fear of those things that go bump in the night. The conclusion of that first story saw a probe escaping from their realm, vanishing out into our universe. To date, this has yet to be mentioned in canon. The nature of their dimension-hopping travel means that these aliens could become the boogeyman of the Milky Way galaxy, posing as demons for countless species. This would also serve as an excuse to bring characters like Rker, Worf, LaForge, and Kaminer back for guest roles, as few who saw Schisms could forget that scene on the holodeck. If ever there was something to set your teeth on edge, it's the clicks in the dark. Want to terrify an entire new generation of Trekkies? Schisms and a follow-up are the way to go. Number 5. Thomas Rker. Thomas Rker was created after a transporter malfunction saw this clone of William T. Rker stranded on Nervala 4. There he remained for 8 years until he was discovered by the Enterprise D. He struggled upon his return to Starfleet, overshadowed by the career of his brother. This saw Thomas decide to abandon Starfleet and join the Maquis. He used his unique position to trick Major Kira into giving him access to the USS Defiant, eventually leading to his capture and imprisonment by the Kardashians. For most people, that would have been a death sentence. Not so for Tom. Star Trek Lower Decks revealed in their episode The Inner Fight that Thomas was, in fact, still alive and was being sought out by Starfleet. The reveal that he is still alive begs many questions. How did he survive his internment in the Liaison 2 labor camp? Why was he not executed when the Dominion destroyed the Maquis? Did he then escape, or was he released? Quite frankly, what has he been up to in all of this time? How might he feel upon the discovery that Will Riker and Deanna Troi had rekindled their relationship, marrying and having 2 children? Might this be one step too much for him to handle, seeing a life that he could never have had? Number 4. Captain Cisco. This is the dream, isn't it? Somewhere outside of time itself, Captain Ben Sisko is with the Prophets in the Celestial Temple. As the years go by, his promise to Cassidy is getting a little harder to believe. Also, considering he is outside of time, the fact that he hasn't returned begs an answering arc. Avery Brooks has not appeared in Star Trek since What You Leave Behind, though he has voiced the character in Star Trek Online. However, it does feel like the time for Cisco to return is more relevant than ever. The resurgence of Deep Space Nine in recent years, thanks largely to its availability on streaming services, has helped the show's popularity grow. Star Trek Picard has already addressed some of the threads left from its final season, but Cisco's fate still eludes us. What We Left Behind, the documentary celebrating Deep Space Nine, saw a potential for bringing the character back in a purported 8th season, which also introduced Cisco's second son, Joseph. The simple fact is that this story is unfinished, and we as Trekkies are nothing if not insatiable. For this one, we'd take a full season arc on Star Trek Legacy, or even a long trek. Just bring Cisco home. Number 3. Ongoing relations in the Delta Quadrant. Star Trek Prodigy has revealed that between protostar drives and general propulsion advancement, travel between the Alpha and Delta Quadrants is no longer a lifetime commitment. With the number of first contacts that Captain Janeway and the crew of USS Voyager were responsible for, revisiting the Delta Quadrant seems like a no-brainer. The destruction of the Borg Collective also ensures a huge vacuum now exists in what was formerly their territory. What does the landscape of the Delta Quadrant now resemble? And what other powers have flourished without the Borg holding them back? If nothing else, it would be worth a visit to the Ocampa homeworld. Quite frankly, we want to see them as one of the great powers in the galaxy. It would certainly help further justify Janeway's decision to destroy the Caretaker's array. What of the Talaxians, the Brunari, the Krenim? The nature of Star Trek Voyager didn't really allow for much revisiting storylines as the ship moved closer and closer towards home. The impact of Voyager's journey was already shown to have some notoriety in the original show, so a Federation presence in the quadrant would certainly seem justified. If ever there was a call for a second contact, it would seem more timely than ever. Number 2. The Temporal Cold War. The Temporal Cold War, by its very nature, is the storyline that could bring all of existing Star Trek together in a crossover event. This is another idea that we have touted before, though with Star Trek Discovery bringing it into their future history, it seems, more forgive the pun, timely. Star Trek Enterprise had ideas for the 5th season that never was, one of which included revealing Jonathan Archer as the future guy who was working with the Suliban. The Guardian of Forever has to hide itself away from the galaxy to avoid being abused for the war. Discovery's arrival in the future was a crime against the laws decided after the wars. All of these are plot threads begging for exploration. In a show named Star Trek Legacy, the fallout of one of Starfleet's greatest captains operating as someone manipulating time could have serious, long-term repercussions for history. Add this to Kirk's body in Daystrom Station and another entry on this list, the Temporal Cold War could serve as a way to create one of the biggest events in Star Trek's history, finally uniting the captains on screen for the first time. Number 1. Where the hell is Sela? If there's one thing that we here at TrekCulture are in danger of becoming, is that we may get slightly repetitive. But we don't care. Where the hell is Sela? To be fair, Star Trek Picard's third season was a busy one, so cramming her in may not have done the character justice. The first season, however, would have seemed the perfect time to bring her back. The Romulan Empire, having suffered a cataclysmic event with a supernova, needed someone to unify it. Who better than Sela? Even if she perhaps doesn't have the Quadrant's best interests at heart. She is one of, if not the, biggest dangling thread from Star Trek The Next Generation. She was working with Praetor Neral, who would return in Inter Arma Enum Silent Legis, sans Sela, though he was replaced before the unlucky Praetor Huron was on the receiving end of Shinzon's Thaleron generator in Star Trek Nemesis. With that power vacuum and the chaotic nature of the Empire in the years that followed, the return and rise of this brilliant tactician would seem ripe for the exploring. That's everything for our list today. Now, I'm sure everyone has a ton of ideas and we want to hear them, so let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to get in touch over on Twitter at TrekCulture, Instagram at TrekCultureYT. We're also on both TikTok and Blue Sky at TrekCulture there as well. I'm Sean Ferrick. I'm at Sean Ferrick on the various socials. Thank you very much. You are awesome. You are wonderful. Keep things timely and live long and prosper. Gurav Mila Mahagat. Thanks a million.